Hello, everybody. My name is Qubain. I'm an attorney with Gleason Koatz, and we welcome you all in this commercial and residential leases, which we felt that it would make a great subject for a webinar, especially with everything that's going on. We have great panelists today. We have Fernando Koatz, who's a partner in Gleason Koatz. Fernando has extensive experience with respect to various real estate transactions, including co-ops, condos, townhouses, buildings, and even hotels. He's a great source for continuing education for real estate brokers. He's been tirelessly working on providing classes, and also he's a great attorney. I worked with him, I've been working with him for 15 years. We have Stefani Pace. She is a great expert in real estate in New York. She has helped many clients navigate through the Manhattan maze of real estate. She also closed over 200 million in deals, and surprisingly, she has a master's in psychology. We have Paul Moulins, or as it's correctly pronounced, Moulins. He is Director of Commercial Real Estate with KW Commercial Realty Group International. It's a full-service commercial real estate company servicing Westchester, Manhattan, Bronx, and Fairfield. I'm sure everybody is going to give you a little bit more flavor about what they do and the practice they have. So let's start with the panelists. Fernando, would you like to start?
Yes, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Fernando Koatz. I've been a lawyer practicing for over 30 years. I do mainly commercial and residential real estate. Half of my clients, more or less, are from abroad, based abroad, mainly from Latin America and Western Europe because of my background in languages. And for them, and for US-based clients, I take care with respect to purchases, sales, construction development, commercial leases, whether offices, retail, banks, and whatnot, as well as doing representing mostly borrowers with respect to refinancing, hard money loans, and the like.
Stephanie?
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Stefani Pace. I'm a residential real estate broker with Compass, and I've been in the business for 16 years. I focus mainly on Manhattan, but I do the luxury areas of Brooklyn and Queens.
Paul?
Yes, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Paul Moulins. I'm with KW Commercial Realty, and I've been in the business for close to 20 years. And I'm a bit of a generalist when it comes to commercial real estate. It's all I do. I don't do houses. I don't sell apartments, but I'll sell you an apartment building. I do everything from commercial and industrial through retail, office space, leasing and sales, as well as hospitality, hotels, sports complexes. So pretty much run the gamut of the commercial industry.
Thank you, Paul.
Sure.
And the purpose of this webinar is to answer as many questions as possible that Fernando and I, Paul and Stephanie, have been receiving from potential either clients or purchasers, people in the market, or lessors of apartments. And the question is how to navigate the commercial and residential leases during this unprecedented COVID era. There are certain legal issues that we will address. Also, our biggest probably point is going to be addressing the effect of commercial and residential on COVID on the commercial and residential landlords and tenants. And I think the experience we have here is immense between Stephanie and Paul, Fernando and myself. We can probably help answer many questions and address points that are making the real estate world in Manhattan somewhat confusing to many. So Fernando, I just want to start with you. I know the main point that we would like to address today, aside from the realistic and the practical issues, is the legal issues. So I want to start with you to just make sure that everybody is on the same page when it comes to dealing with commercial and residential leases.
Okay, well, with respect to residential, it's basically looking at the lease and what some of New York law provides to protect residential tenants. With commercial, it's a little more complicated because First of all, the lease itself controls as much as possible with respect to the rights and obligations of the tenants and the landlord, and in general, and I do not know how it'll be once the courts reopen and start litigating all the issues arising from failure to pay rent, businesses being closed, and retail, offices, and the like, is the law in New York is strictly interpreted and enforced in favor of the landlord. So you need to look at the lease, you need to also look at insurance provisions, and you need to look at the common law where people talk about, among other things, impossibility of performance, frustration of purpose. A lot of people talk about also about force majeure. That's a contractual provision that needs to be negotiated into the contract. So all these things need to be addressed legally, but in a practical situation, and Paul and Stephanie can address this as well, you have to look at what either the commercial residential landlord's position is vis-a-vis the tenant, their own financial situation, and the other people they have to respond to, mainly other lenders and tax authorities.
Paul, would you like to add?
Yes. So, I mean, I guess part of this is about, I guess we can talk about some of the questions that I've been asked, or one of the major questions I've been asked is what happens when a tenant, tenants will call me and they'll say, I can't afford my rent. What can I do, or what actions can I take? And, under commercial real estate, as Fernando was saying, the lease is rather rigid, and there's not much room in there. So, but the first thing to do, of course, is consult with your attorney, and then as you should realize it, or should go through your lease. And there are some actions you can take. I think the most important thing to do for a tenant is to communicate. Is to communicate with your landlord and not put your head in the sand. I don't know if Stephanie agrees with that as well. I think that that's the best thing to do is keep the lines of communication open, and then crunch your numbers, and then look at all the financial assistance that is out there for you and for your business. Unfortunately for landlords, on the landlord side of things, there's been no relief provided to the landlord. The tenants have received all the relief. So landlords are in a bit of a pickle, because they also have, mouths to feed, they have bills to pay, they have to pay the mortgage, they have to pay the taxes, they have to pay their own operating expenses, all those good things. And they're not the bad guy here. It's just it's a matter of communication. So, Stephanie?
Yeah, it's important to understand that every situation is different, and the better the relationship, and as Paul said, the better the communication that the tenant and the landlord have, the better the situation. Each situation will be. The first thing to do is for them to talk, and to see what agreement that they could come up with. If they can't come up with an agreement, the first thing I do say is to talk to your lawyer. There's different things that they can do. De Blasio announced in July, MOPT, Mayor's Office to Protect Tenants. And that's a form of communication with the city trying to help out if you can't communicate together. And if they can't help out, then they're gonna refer an attorney. So, it's all, like Paul said, it's just communicating, trying to come out with some kind of agreement. I mean, I've been through so many relationships with me trying to be, with my psychology degree, trying to be the coordinator, the mediator for them. That's all you can do really at that point, unless it ends up with the lawyer.
And do you feel, Stephanie, Paul, and Fernando, that landlords, whether commercial or residential, have the appetite to talk to the tenants, or are they taking the high road?
At this point, I feel like they have no choice. Both of them have no choice. On the residential side, it's gotten really bad for both sides. With tenants if they're still not working, and landlords, there's, they just came out in the paper, over 67,000 vacant residential units in July. Since they started keeping records, there hasn't been that many vacant units. The rents are dropping dramatically. They have no choice but for them to communicate and try to come up with some kind of solution.
But I might add, with respect to the residential, under the law, the current administrative orders that were issued because of the pandemic, in residential leases, the landlord is obligated to apply the security deposit they hold, or maybe not hold, to the rent. So the lease that has that relief, the tenant, and not, if they can't pay the rent, if they have one or two, well, now these days, since the new law was passed last year, you couldn't hold more than 1 month's rent, but if there was a bigger or larger security deposit, you could apply that to the rent. The other thing is, as opposed to the commercial tenants, which they're trying to change now in the New York Assembly, a residential landlord, if someone leaves and breaks their lease, which is another issue, the landlord has to mitigate his or her damage. In other words, they have to go and find actively a tenant to replace. They can't leave the space open. Now, there are some exceptions to this breaking the lease rule. One is, for example, if you're 62 years or older, in New York, I'm talking about New York City, you want to move to a senior living facility, you can break the lease. If you've been activated to go on military duty, you can break the lease and leave without any consequences.
Do you feel that the halt that New York State has now on residential and commercial evictions is forcing the landlord to negotiate?
Well, I don't know. Paul, I'm sure, would have a slightly different take on this, but I think right now that helps the tenants to a degree, but the landlords know that up until now, and I mean now, before the pandemic, the law is really in favor of the contract, the lease itself. For example, a tenant has an obligation to pay the rent. That's a sacrosanct covenant in the contract. You cannot say, I don't want to pay it for whatever reason, and say, well, you know, I'm not going to pay it because, well, there are defenses you can assert, but they're separate from what your actual the obligation to pay the rent. Now, the tenant should, because they're not allowed to give abatement either as well, a commercial tenant, they should, up until recently, you would pay the rent and then sue for damages. So I think the landlords are kind of in a bind. They're waiting to see what will happen once these cases come to fruition, because the courts will decide, for example, a lot of issues involving force majeure. I mean, force majeure says if you have something that's unpredictable and it's in the actual contract, like pandemic, and now Paul knows about this, they're putting them in the actual leases. But if you didn't have a lease before, you're going to be out of luck. You're going to say, well, oh yeah, I couldn't go because of the pandemic. I couldn't go to my office. I couldn't operate my business. The court's going to say it's not in a lease, forget about it. There are other clauses in a lease, condemnation, casualty, but they don't really apply because they apply to destruction of the premises, partial or complete. So then you have to go to the defenses, the common law defenses. And the big ones people talk about, frustration of purpose and impossibility of performance. Both of them have been traditionally very strictly construed by the New York courts. Going back to 1918, we had the Spanish flu epidemic, and the courts, in the few cases we have, would side with the landlord when someone said, I couldn't work because there was an epidemic in 1918, 1919. That may all change now. Frustration of purpose or impossibility of performance. And impossibility of performance, just to give an example, would be, it's an extreme one, something that's unpredictable like a tornado. Tornadoes do not usually occur in New York. Tornado comes and destroys your building, so you can't operate. That's impossibility of performance. Now, the frustration of purpose would be more like a strip mall that, or something like that, that's been built, and all of a sudden the president decides to build a wall to separate the mall because on the border, some ridiculous example I'll give you. You're frustrating your purpose to conduct your business there. But those are very unusual examples. We don't know, I don't know how it'll be interpreted once they go to court, when the eviction stay is lifted, and I don't know what the judges are going to do. That's why it's kind of in a stasis right now.
The frustration of purpose, if I may add, basically has to be the complete basis of the contract. And mostly in commercial and residential real estate leases, I don't think that is the case, but I agree with you. I think a lot of this remains to be seen, especially when the courts open in full force. Just to give an idea to everybody that is watching this, New York has extended the moratorium on the commercial side until September 22nd and the residential until September 4th, which means that no eviction will take place until October 1st. Now, after that, whether this will continue or will be extended again is remain to be seen. If it's not, then we will have the courts will open their doors and we will have our answer as to how sympathetic the courts are going to be to either the landlord or the tenant. But Fernando, as since we're talking about the frustration of purpose and the defenses to the contract or to the lease, would you address, please, the issue of force majeure and whether this is a base in this situation?
Well, as I said, and Paul and I were talking about this just the other day, about clauses that address that issue. Unless it says specifically pandemic, force majeure is an act of God, and it has to be something completely unforeseeable. Having a pandemic, unfortunately, we had SARS, we had MERS, these things in the last 10, 15 years, it's not considered, or hasn't been until recently considered, completely unpredictable. So if you don't have it in the actual lease, because force majeure is not a common law basis of law, it's actually in the contractual provision that's negotiated. I mean, you can speak about it more, Paul, about these pandemic clauses.
Absolutely. So, so it's interesting. Circling back to sort of communication again, before you even start thinking about eviction, landlords are not necessarily thinking about eviction unless they have another tenant. The lease is a legally binding document, so there's no really need for a landlord to evict anyone. Because they have, if your lease is 2, 3, 4, 5 years out or what have you, I mean, you're actually legally obligated to pay that rent. So unless the landlord has another tenant that's going to come in there and take the space, he's not going to essentially release you. So that said, Fernando just mentioned, and as we were talking the other day, I actually got we're in the middle of a lease negotiation right now, where the tenant has inserted a pandemic clause into the lease. And so this is sort of like fresh, this is a fresh clause that just came out. And it's basically a simple, the statement is basically that. It's that if we're faced with a pandemic and there's a closure of business, if there's a state closure or any sort of situation like that, then the tenant would be able to terminate the lease or receive a rent abatement. And that's a brand new, fresh ink on the paper, as far as I'm concerned, of ever seeing anything like that being inserted into a lease rider. Before we even get to that, though, I mean, back to communication, there are some, when you're, again, talking with your landlord is so key to this. And it's all going to depend also on your current situation. What I mean by this, your pre-COVID situation. If you're a tenant in good standing and you have a good relationship with your landlord, perhaps there's some temporary solutions, like asking for a rental abatement for a certain period of time, and then perhaps working out a lease extension so that you end up paying it on the back end down the road. So let's say you have 3 years remaining on your lease and you're into this, the pandemic here, say 6 months. They'll extend the lease perhaps to 3 years and 6 months, and you'll have that 6-month rental abatement, and then you pay it down the road again on the back end. That's something to consider if the tenant, if the landlord really likes you and he really thinks you're creditworthy. A lot of landlords aren't going to do that because obviously, if you're asking for 6 months of free rent, you may end up going out of business anyway, and they will never get the money back on the back end. That said, you could also ask again for a short term, like a rental period, a rental abatement. And let's say you carry it forward into the following year so that you end up paying back the rent in the following year on top of the rent that you currently owe. So they would just amortize it into the following year's rent. That's usually something that's more palatable. That said, the landlord, and be prepared for this, the landlord will probably ask you for your financials. They're going to want to see if you're claiming hardship, if you're claiming that you can't afford your rent, then you have to be prepared to support that claim. So just, because there are tenants out there, obviously, that are possibly taking advantage of this situation.
Are
go ahead, sorry.
Are landlords looking at your financial situation pre-COVID and post-COVID, or they just want to
they're looking, they tend to look at your financials obviously prior to signing a lease with you. So typically a landlord's going to ask you for your last 2 years of operating financials prior to a lease execution. But during the course of a lease, they're not necessarily asking to see your financials. There's no need. But in a situation like this, where you're trying to renegotiate your position, I think the landlord would have every right to say, well, okay, you're claiming hardship. Show me your financials. That's not unreasonable, I don't think. Now, there are other things, and I'm sure Fernando can speak to this as well. As you are reviewing your lease and reviewing your lease with your attorney or your real estate professional, there are other things that may have been negotiated into your lease, such as there may be a cancellation clause that's in your lease. Also, perhaps, did you sign a personal guarantee? If you signed a personal guarantee, if you go out of business, for example, you're still personally on the hook to pay the rest of the remaining term of the lease. So that can be troublesome. The other thing you might have is what's called a good guy clause, or it's basically a limited personal guarantee, which is just that, simply put, you plan to be a good guy if you are in a position where you have to leave the space and terminate the lease. There will be some remedies to the landlord, and it'll set you free. And it's basically a softer way out. And of course, one of the final things to have to consider, unfortunately, would be a bankruptcy, and that would obviously remove your obligations to paying the remaining term of the lease. And so, I mean, those are the 3 or 4 main things that you'd have to consider, I think, and if you're looking to actually get out of your leasing situation.
Stefani, how do you see the market going after this? I mean, we know a lot of businesses are closing, commercial tenants, some are working or moving towards the virtual work environment. Can you give us a flavor of what you think is coming to New York?
Normally, the summer is our peak rental time. It is our busy time. It's when we have low inventory. It's when our inventory is higher because it's when we have all the students. They know where they're going. They just graduated in June. June's our peak time, and then June, July, August, and then inventory gets a little higher in the winter months, and the demand gets lower. So we're looking at a lot of trouble because now the demand is going to get a lot lower in the fall, and we're going to see more inventory come on that normally comes on because it's a natural cycle, and we're going to have less demand and more inventory that we already have sitting there. Like I said, 67,000 units in July, and now we're going to have more inventory come on in rentals and sales. So we're looking at a lot of problems because people, like I was going back to what Fernando was saying about the people. I represent owners of townhouses, and the people that were those lower end units, those $2,000, $2,400 units. When those people, they don't think that when the courts open, if their leases came up, those people left. When those people left the market, they weren't sitting there negotiating and thinking like, oh, well, when my job comes back, they were actors, or they were waitresses, or they were, hair people. They didn't have enough time. They didn't know what was going to happen. They were living month to month. So those people actually just left. Those mass exodus of people who left the city, they left. And I had to re-rent those places. So they weren't waiting for the courts to open and try to have a mediation or going to lawyers. They didn't have the money to do that anyway. So those people just left the city, not waiting for it.
That's a great point. And you don't think this or these vacancies are gonna be filled anytime soon?
There's just so many out there. And I even think that those numbers are low because those big buildings are only releasing like 4 or 5 or 6 of their inventory, because they don't say like, oh, we have 30 units available, because that looks like, that looks like too much. Then people come in and negotiate too much, because they're like, they see you have 10 one-bedrooms. So they only release a third of their inventory. So those numbers are even lower.
Is that being reflected in on the price? Or...
I mean, sorry, the numbers are higher because they're releasing lower numbers. Sorry.
My question is, do you see that's being reflected on the price or the lease itself when it comes to new clients coming into the market? Are they finding that landlord is willing to lower the lease to fill these vacancies?
They're giving, and I think the prices, like they're saying that the median price out there, I was just looking up, that the median price New York Times is saying is 3,100. Douglas Elliman saying that the median price, or the Street Easy saying the average price is 4,000. But I think those numbers are a little bit off, because they're giving incentives which throw the numbers off, because some places are giving 4 months free, 3 months free rents. So it's skewing the numbers. But the incentives that these bigger buildings are giving right now, it's hard for private owners to even to combat with that.
Paul, what do you think the appetite for living back in New York after this happens? I mean, there have been couple articles, about whether New York is going to come back anytime soon. In the commercial world, do you think is that realistic, or New York is always going to stay as a magnet for people and investors and businesses?
Well, that's a very good question. I think that Manhattan always bounces back. I think it's going to take some time. After 9/11, a lot of people moved out, then people moved back. This is obviously, frankly, and I don't, no disrespect to 9/11, this is a completely different situation. I think this is probably going to take a while longer. But I do think that Manhattan eventually will respond and return around. I think that the United States of America is still a great place for foreign investors to invest. I think Manhattan is still a great place to invest. I think that it will be even, frankly, more so after the new year. I think there's going to be a probably substantial correction in the value of real estate in the not too distant future, probably, like I said, early next year. And so there are, obviously we're talking about the sort of the negative side of things with regards to, the damage that has been done. But there's also the other side of the coin, which is that there are people out there with cash reserves. And those people that have cash reserves are ready, willing, and able buyers. And they are, frankly, waiting for this correction. And there will be opportunity out there. Just before we came on the air, I did a recent search, and they're right at this time, and I think just in Manhattan, there's just over 900 buildings that are in financial distress, commercial buildings that are in financial distress. So my point is that there will be activity there. Now, that said, what's going to happen to all these buildings? That still is going to remain to be seen. Once investors come in and perhaps make some acquisitions, or how do we repurpose, or do we repurpose? Do these apartment rentals now become apartments for sale and become condos or co-ops, or these office buildings you guys might have to stop me because I'm just going to keep talking because there's a lot to talk about here.
I'm just going to,
because it's like, just like office space, for example. Obviously, it's a new world. You go into the city and you can hear crickets, So, and I live in Westchester, and there's a lot of activity going on up in Westchester. I think a lot of the corporate people that take the train into the city every day are not doing that anymore. People have built out offices in their homes, just like I have, and like we all seem to have. And so, so there's going to be, I think, a change or a shift in the way we view office space. I think office space is still going to be required, believe it or not. And I say required, but I think it's just going to change. And
Paul, I'm going to interrupt you.
Leave it at that. Yep, thank you.
We will address this point in 1 second. I just want to have Fernando look at or tell us about what he's seeing from investors. Fernando had an extensive network with foreign investors, especially from Latin America, and whether or not these investors are interested in New York right now, or they are waiting on the sidelines. That's the question, Fernando. However, I just want to mention, if anybody from the attendees, which we have great attendees today, have questions, please post it in the chat and we'll try our best to answer it.
Well, with respect to foreign investors, I think right now they're kind of sitting a bit on the sidelines. I do get inquiries. I know people who have proceeded to invest from South America. But that's mainly a function of, because as bad as things are here, it's much worse in Latin America in terms of political and economic instability. They still see the New York, as Paul said, and the United States in general, as places that are good to invest. It may not be a great time right now, but there'll be corrections. There was a bit of movement back in April and May. There was an article that came out about purchase of luxury condos in bulk, and it was this group from Peru, I believe, that was able to negotiate downward price in the luxury condo market, which is already saturated before the pandemic, about 2, 3, 4, 5%, 7%, that's what it was. But the condo sponsors have the same problem that Paul's alluding to with respect to landlords. They owe bridge loans, construction loans. They're up against the wall because these hard money lenders, or the private money lenders, and the banks and the institutions want their money back. And there's no support in that regard for the sponsors or the landlords in terms of legislation. There's new legislation out there, for example, on a slightly different note, that helps the tenants, as Paul was saying before. For example, they want they're talking about a bill to pass in the New York Assembly, which hasn't been approved yet, to mandate business interruption insurance include pandemic. Because the other thing that I always tell people, when they analyze a lease or the common law defenses they can assert, they should look at their business interruption insurance. Because if they don't look at it, certainly the landlord will look at it and say, what about that? Or did you get PPP loan, which is a whole nother thing. But they're trying to mandate business interruption because business interruption basically does not apply to pandemic unless you have a rider. Very few people have that, because that really only applies when there's been destruction to the premises, that you can't come into your office, you can't go to your restaurant or to your warehouse to do business. The other thing that New York Assembly is proposing is to make landlords, or commercial landlords, mitigate their damages, which are not required, as I said before, with respect to residential leases, and go look for another tenant. Just like Paul said, they could sit and wait, a commercial landlord, and just ride out the lease and then sue or in the process sue to get their money. There's a bill out there to say, hey, let's help out the commercial tenants and not make them responsible, because as Paul again spoke, there are these guarantees. The one is a financial guarantee in general, which is not as common as the good guy guarantee. That good guy guarantee is a key there, which you have to give notice as an individual. It could be a corporation, but almost always an individual, saying that until you give that notice, you will be responsible for the time that the tenant remains in the premises and does not pay rent. Once you give that notice and the tenant leaves, then you're no longer responsible as an individual. The tenant is still responsible unless this bill is passed by the New York Assembly. So that being all said, going back to the foreign investors, they're waiting to see. They want to see how it shakes out with the courts, whether the new laws are going to be passed to protect the tenants and possibly the landlords who need help with the banks and so forth.
Understood. And I want to address how the COVID is changing the New York City commercial and residential real estate. Stefani, I know from many clients that we've been talking to that they have seen an increased demand on the short lease. Can you talk about that from your perspective?
What? I'm sorry. The short lease?
Short leases.
Like short term?
Right.
Oh, I haven't seen any of that.
Have you seen demand increasing on that?
I haven't seen any.
No. Okay.
I have.
Can you tell us, Paul?
Yeah, very quickly, you know, it's you know, and this happened actually in 2008 as well. You know, people were so uncertain about the state of the market that they were afraid. And so when people are afraid, they go short. And so, that I am seeing a lot of that. I just relocated a a law group up from the city that wanted to go to the Bronx. And they wanted to go to the Bronx because the owner, the head of the law firm, lives in the Bronx, and he wanted to be able to walk to his office today. That's it. That's, you know, and that's a sign of the times, but also he wanted a short-term lease. And he's just doing one-year leases. And so he actually signed a commitment for 5 years with options to cancel every year. You know, and I'm seeing more of that, actually, just people that are just want to be able to get out. And that was, you know, he didn't ask for a pandemic clause in the lease, but he did say, you know, I want a cancellation clause so I can get out. And I did the same thing actually with an architect just last week as well. Believe it or not, this is a new thing. It seems to be a new trend where.
Oh, let me, so
Right.
I have my owners, and my owners have the tenants in the places, and it's very important for me when I'm representing my owners for them to have a lease that starts in the summer, because the summertime is the peak season, and so the rents are highest in the summer. So all of these tenants that have been there and their leases expire in the summer, a year lease is what we give them, and they had expired this summer, and they all asked, can we extend it for 4 months? Can we extend it for 5 months? That short term, and all the owners come and they ask me what they do. They're hanging on my every word at this time because they're all uncertain, and my answer is absolutely no. You sign for 1 year or you're out now. And I know it's risky to be out now, but I cannot have that lease end in December. I cannot have that lease end in November, December, January, February, March, because then the rents will be worse. And then we start this, you know, you have a bad year in the stock market. That's fine, have a bad year. I cannot have a bad 5 years. Have a bad year and that be it. Let them out now, and let's find new tenants. Yes, I might find you a new tenant at $1,000, yet $1,000 less than it was. That's one example. She was renting for $4,500, and I had to reduce the rent to $3,500, right on 78th and West End. But it's only for 1 year. It's not for the next 10 years because we cannot re-sign a lease in December. So that, yes, they did ask for those little extensions because they weren't sure. They're going to lose their job, or what's going to happen? Are they going to move back to their parents in Virginia? Yes, they all asked that, but it was either re-sign for a year or goodbye.
Right. No, it's a very interesting time. I think that these short-term leases are going to be a thing for a while, and it's interesting. Landlords are coming to me and saying, not unlike Stefani, what do you do? And I'm like, and I tell them, make your best deal. Make your best deal today. You know, that's all you can really do in the market in the commercial market is make your best deal today. Because there's going to be a correction. You can see it coming, you know, you know, if you know, one of the things that's going to happen when we do see the correction. And so those of us that are in a position where they can afford to wait, if you're a tenant and you're on the, you know, and let's say your lease is expiring and it's looking to expire in the new year, or it might be expiring now and your landlord is still trying to charge you today's rents, or, you know, I'll call it pre-COVID rents even. The thing is see if you can negotiate, you know, and just do a month to month. They can't evict you right now anyway. An eviction is going to take 9 months if they try to evict you. 6 to 9 months, whether it's commercial or residential. You can correct me on that anytime, Fernando. But the thing is that I think in the new year, since there's going to be everyone is anticipating a correction, there will also be a correction in the rents. And when that correction happens, as a tenant, that's what I'm going to suggest to you to go long, because your rents, once there's a rental adjustment in the new year, the rents will obviously should drop obviously below what was considered market rent before. And when this happened in 2008, I was telling tenants, you know, go long, do a 10-year lease. Seriously, do the 10-year lease. And there were some that listened, and there were some that did not. And what was interesting was that those that did not, and when we go back to pre-COVID, and I was having some tenants' leases expiring, and here we are in this very hot real estate market. The tenants that are, and I'm giving you real examples here. One of my tenants, he decided to not do a longer term 10-year lease. He decided to just do a 5-year lease. At the end of the 5th year, his lease, the landlord came to him and tried to increase his rent by 80%. 80%. So, and I just was talking with a landlord the other day, a friend of mine who has a tenant that did a short-term, did a long-term lease, did a 10-year lease. It still has 7 years remaining on the lease. And that same tenant, just to kind of circle back, the first tenant that did the short-term lease, he was paying about $12 a square foot. The landlord tried to increase his rent to something like $20 a square foot. I'm serious, an 80% increase. The tenant that did the longer term lease is still paying $12 a foot or $13 a foot, where the other tenant is now paying $20. And it's just because in the down market, they took advantage and they went long. Right now, I'm encouraging my tenants that I represent to do short-term leases, because a year from now, for example, I think it'll be a good time to renegotiate and restructure. So
Many
that's my advice.
many of the people we talk to and clients, especially in the commercial realm, they are wondering whether this will end next year or the year after. And the question is how long the landlord can sustain or have their ability to pay the bills, the taxes, and all that if this continues.
Right. I think that, so I work on a number of hotel projects, and of course the transportation and vacation industry, we'll call it vacation industry, has suffered, obviously, and hotels are at the forefront of that. Hotels are closing left and right, and but in my work in hotels, they are anticipating a recovery to perhaps pre-COVID levels, probably sometime in 2023. So it's going to take some time for the hotel industry, the hospitality industry, to recover. So I don't know if that is essentially going to trickle into the market, the entire market in general, but that's the sense I'm getting, is that we're looking at 2 years, 2 years on a recovery.
And Stephanie, I want to ask you, do you see demand for larger space or larger apartments just because people are working from home, or maybe some are not sending their kids to school, or that's not there yet?
We say outdoor space is king, office space is king, the stay-at-home extra room, like the study-at-home room, is king. Those places are, if people are staying here, those are the things they're looking for. But outdoor space has been the number one. If you have something with outdoor space, that's moving. That's moving.
I recently helped a friend that was renting space in New Jersey City, and his parents, his family were like an hour drive, so he decided to go move with them, and he actually rented his apartment as a day use office space for his neighbor downstairs. I thought it was ingenious. I mean, this is something to make money and to continue paying your rent without giving notice to the landlord, and the landlord agreed to lower the rent to meet that day use license fee. So it was a win-win situation. I wonder if it's going to be more like this in the residential situation.
Yeah, when people are looking, if you have, like they're coming in, people who are moving from a 1-bedroom, like a couple, they're looking for a 2-bedroom because they want that second bedroom for an office. Or if they have kids, they want a 3-bedroom or a 2-bedroom with some kind of home office for either the office or for if the kid is going to be at home, you know, that new, like, you know,
Right.
hashtag stay home or whatever it was. Yeah. I've been advertising some of my places like that, you know, the stay at home.
Fernando, I want to just address the landlord side of the argument. We've always been thinking about this in terms of what's best for the tenant, what the tenant, commercial or residential, can or cannot do. But from the perspective of the landlord, what is your thinking that a landlord should do when faced with a position faced with a situation where 50% or 30% or 40% of the space is vacant in a building?
Well, I think the landlord has to, as others have said here so far, there has to be communication and talk to the people who are already there in the building and reach some kind of accommodation before even more tenants leave. And they have to offer something to the effect of, it could be a partial deferral and then paid out at the end of the lease that's extended. It could be convert, and not all landlords like this, but they've been a little more amenable, convert the rent to a percentage of sales if it's retail. But of course, the landlord will want to see your financials and a proof that your sales have gone down, because retail's really suffered. And that's another subject. We're talking about commercial. There are a lot of different sub-markets within commercial, industrial, warehouse. They've been doing rather well because places like Amazon use warehouses as distribution centers, or Best Buy, or the other places. The same thing, but on the other hand, offices are really in trouble because a lot of people don't want to come back or are worried about COVID-19 even if they come back. And then there's the issue coming through the subways for a lot of people who are scared of doing that as well. It's really a mixed bag. So if you're a landlord, you want to try to offer that there is some safety in regard with respect to possibility of the disease affecting someone or the virus in their building. You want to try to offer some flexibility on the actual lease itself. And try to also, a lot of landlords are asking what are called pre-negotiation agreements. That tends to be with the larger tenants that they have, or the larger landlords dealing with larger tenants, in which when they enter negotiation, the commercial tenant is going to waive already whatever defenses they may have going forward with respect to lease negotiation if they can't reach an agreement. And these kind of things there is flexibility that they're trying to get to it, but there's still, because there's so much flux and we don't know what the courts will do, what judges sitting in New York City will think or act with respect to the mayhem that's really here. And I mean mayhem in the sense that we don't know what's going to happen, that we're so worried. There's no vaccine. People are scared about their health. They don't have a job and so forth. They don't know how it'll all play out in the long run. So if I'm representing a landlord, and I usually represent tenants, but I do have some clients who are landlords, I say, let's try to show and try to do flexibility. But the problem is, and we've said this before, Paul's talked about it as well, the landlords have to respond to their own lenders. They have to pay real property taxes. No one's talking about waiving those. If they were talking about that, it would blast a bigger hole in the budgets of both New York City and New York State. So what do we do? Ultimately, the federal government has to step in at some point and offer some relief to the landlords so that it flows downward so they can be even more flexible.
And my question to all of you, and I would like you to each take a minute, if you could, to address it, is have we seen the true effect of COVID on the real estate market in New York, or you think the worst is yet to come? Fernando?
I think the worst is not over. I would love to believe in a V-shaped recovery, but I don't think it's going to happen without that vaccine and federal government stepping in. We're in, as the hospitality people have been telling Paul, probably not till 2022, around there, 2023. It'll come back, but it's going to take a lot longer.
Yeah, I agree. I think there's going to be a slower recovery. But, you know, again, I have faith in the United States. I have faith in Manhattan, in this industry that we're in here in New York and Connecticut, in this general area. But, you know, it's just going to take some time. And, you know, it takes a long time to turn a big ship around, right? So when the economy goes down like it did in 08, it's going to be a similar situation, you know, and it's going to be a slow slow and steady kind of turnaround in real estate. And I think that there's going to end up being just a lot of change. I think that, but I think that there's a lot of smart people out there. There's going to be a lot of innovation. There's going to be a lot of creativity. And I think that there's going to be, say, office buildings that may end up converting into different types of uses. I think that zoning is going to have to change on certain things, perhaps to be a little more flexible. I think that, like, for example, going back, I know Stephanie, there's going to be like, oh, this housing crisis is going on, but you may end up seeing there be a hold on construction. There is a hold on construction. Believe me, it's all on hold right now. But the point is that maybe they start converting certain office buildings into mixed use type situations where you have a condo in an office, where you have a condo floors along with the office space. There may be some sort of a mixed type situation happening. So, there's going to be a lot of innovation and creativity, and there's a lot of smart people here. So we'll always be able to turn this thing around, but I really do think it's just going to take some time, and there's going to be some major corrections happening, but I'm not going anywhere. Are you?
No,
where are you going to go? I love it here.
I honestly, I don't know. If I could answer that question, I'd be on a bigger channel than we're on right now. I'm hoping that after the election that there's a little more confidence and that there's a little bit more of a change. I don't know if you read Seinfeld's article, but I stand behind him completely.
That was a good article.
It was a great article. I stand behind him completely. Yeah, like I said, I'm with Compass, and our CEO, who I love him absolutely. He honestly believes it's going to be, it's going to take about 2 years, what Paul and Fernando were saying, that before we see, pre-COVID levels, where the market was really starting to pick up, that it's going to take, not the country, but it's going to take New York City to get back to that.
Well, thank you for that. I think it's sobering to think about this, that, we would not have ever imagined thinking or discussing this in February or January or even December last year. And to go to the city these days and walk in the streets and you see how empty it is, it's just, it brings reality to you, and it basically hits you hard. But I agree with all of you. I think New York is very strong. The US is very, very strong, and it will take a while, but I think everybody is going to make it out of this. Like Paul said, we have great, smart people who are creative, and we will get through it. Lastly, I just want to thank everybody for their participation. I think this was a great panel. We have great attendance, and I haven't seen questions. I think we covered a lot of points. And if you guys have any final remarks you would like to make, please go ahead. Otherwise, we're going to conclude.
Well, I just like to say thank you for the opportunity and being a moderator, Cal. As always, I've done other seminars with you. You are brilliant with your questions and the way you handle a rowdy group of presenters. Well, not so rowdy. Anyway, I want to just say that I think we will get out of this eventually in New York. I love this city. I do not want to leave. With all due respect to the suburbs, I don't want to go there either. I want to stay here in New York City in the 5 boroughs. But I do think we're in for a very difficult time. And there'll be a lot of shakeout there, and there'll be a lot of people, unfortunately, who are already suffering, and there'll be more people. But I think we can put it together, and if we have more assistance, and I don't want to editorialize or sound political, from the federal government and getting things done, maybe in New York State and Albany, that would help both sides, not just the tenants, but the landlords as well, in general, then maybe we would be, and helping, for example, with aid to the subways. MTA threatened their chairman, I think yesterday, saying if they don't get more federal aid, they're going to have to cut back severely services. And how do you get people to the city, assuming that they're not worried about the virus anymore, to work? So all these things have to come together slowly but surely. I hope it's done, and I still have confidence we'll get there. If anyone has any questions, please.
To everybody who's asking, yes, we will have a recording of this session. We will email it to everybody who signed up. Also, we have posted the contact information for Stephanie, Paul, Fernando, and myself in the chat section. You can grab it from there if you need to email them or call them. The contact information is available in the chat section. And again, we will send it with the recording. And if you guys have any follow-up questions to any of the panelists, please feel free to contact them. I'm sure they are ready, willing, and able to help. And even if it was just about bouncing ideas and getting their thoughts. And I think that concludes it. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Stephanie. Thank you, Paul. Thank you, Fernando. And thanks to everybody who participated. Appreciate it.
Thank you,
guys.
everyone.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank you,
you.
everybody. Bye-bye.
Bye.